Hello. Hi. Hello,
Hello.
everyone. Welcome to this session on embedding intelligence into execution. Today, we are joined by Dante Liew and Richard from uh, Databricks and InspireXT, respectively. A very a very warm welcome to the audience. Wherever you're joining us from, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, based on your time zone. Today, we're going to be discussing a very, very exciting topic about value chain command centers and how they help turn visibility into execution for businesses. So, without further ado, I will quickly run through what we'll be explaining in the session and then give a chance for the speakers to introduce themselves as well. So today we will be covering we'll be talking about value chain command centers, how businesses in the current times have to move beyond just visibility, dashboards, analytics into actual execution based on intelligence that they gather from technology, systems, their environment. So this session is actually going to cover why this matters for businesses and supply chains. What are the current approaches that they're following right now, and why they need to go further? How InspireXT is positioned to help them with their value chain command center offering, and how Databricks is the right platform to enable this offering, right? So I'm going to hand over to our esteemed speakers to introduce themselves, after which I'll introduce myself and then get straight into the discussion for this LinkedIn Live. So, Richard, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kirti. Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm Rich Lewis, Data and AI Global Markets Lead here at InspireXT. My focus over the last 20 years or so has been really on helping businesses, particularly within retail, manufacturing and supply chain, use data, AI and process intelligence to really improve how they manage performance, efficiency and make better decisions across the value chain, right the way from commerce through to operations. And it's a real pleasure to join you, Kirti, Dante, and our audience today to have this really topical and important discussion.
Thanks. Thanks, Rich. Dante, if I could
Yep,
give you the chance, yeah.
sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Dante, and I'm based in Singapore. So, I'm a solutions engineer here at Databricks, mainly managing the greenfield territories for Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia in the emerging enterprise segment. So, I work across many different industries, be it retailers, manufacturers, and even finance companies. So, really happy to be here. It's a pleasure of mine to be able to contribute to this topic and just share an open discussion with both Kirti and Richard here today. Yeah. So nice to meet everyone.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Dante. So, Rich joining in from the UK, so probably about 8 a.m. for you there. So that's some
Yeah,
commitment. And Dante joining in from Singapore, and I'm based in Singapore as well. I'm Kirti Pathania. I'm the regional director for InspireXT and leading operations for InspireXT in Singapore. So I wanted to kick off the discussion, probably Rich, going to you first. So before we get into a lot of nitty-gritties about the discussion, what are the rising topics that you see in the boardrooms for retailers and manufacturers these days? What's the trend right now?
yeah. Thanks, Kirti. I think this topic of value chain command centers is absolutely rising up the boardroom agenda at the moment because for both retailers and manufacturers, they're facing increasingly volatile and complex environments, and I think the ultimate cost of slow or compartmentalized kind of fragmented decision making is getting higher. So here at InspireXT, when we talk about the supply chain of the future, we see five priorities coming through really consistently in our conversations. So the first is building resilient supply chains. The second is embedding intelligence into execution. The third is integrating sustainability into core operations. The fourth is developing an AI augmented workforce. And then the fifth is delivering predictable enterprise value. And I think all five of those supply chain priorities matter, but the one that we're really focusing on today is embedding intelligence into execution, because that's where a lot of organizations are, I think, feeling the gap most clearly. So, most of the organizations that we speak to have got plenty of data, dashboards, planning tools, reporting tools. But I think what leadership teams are really recognizing is that the real challenge isn't about getting more reports. It's really understanding where performance is moving, where pressure is building, and then how quickly that's likely to show up somewhere else in the business. So a service issue can quickly become an inventory issue. An inventory issue can become a margin issue. A supply issue can, really quickly become a customer issue. In manufacturing, something that starts off in materials or production can move straight through to, schedule, service, and cost. In retail, something that starts in, demand or availability can then really quickly show up in fulfillment, margin, and customer experience. So I think that's why this is getting board level attention right now. Leaders want to be able to respond earlier, make better trade-offs, and run the business with more confidence across that entire value chain. And I think that's why this topic is sort of really moving from being a sort of an interesting idea to very much a real priority. And it's why the value chain command center specifically becomes such an important part of this conversation.
So very much a cross-cutting theme across departments, and so a very relevant name, calling it a value chain rather than just a supply chain. But thanks for that, Rich. So coming to Dante, from your world, Dante, from a Databricks point of view, with the conversations that you're having with retailers and manufacturers, are you seeing the same shift from visibility and reporting towards a stronger focus on execution and decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Richard kind of hit the nail on the head. That a lot of the customers that I'm speaking to today, they already have the dashboards, they already have the data, but the same line is like, what can I do with that data, right? Like I visualize it, I report it, but the actions afterwards usually are delayed. So like number one is speed. If like the data comes in, I see the visualization, the process to make that into an action usually takes a few days or a few weeks, and by the time it's like too late. So I think that's one of the biggest problems where you can't really take actions upon the data that you already have, and some of these actually lies in architecture itself as well, where they are only bringing data from specific sources. Different people are seeing different versions of it. There's no alignment across the different teams, be it whether it's supply, planning, or commercial, or even operations. So I think those are the two issues that I really see between the customers. And I think that what you guys have here, and in terms of the value chain command center, will be something that will really benefit a lot of customers.
Yeah, so definitely. So data coming in from a lot of disparate sources and customers trying to make sense. However, just going back to Rich, this kind of a problem statement has been attempted previously by, let's say, retailers and manufacturers by bringing in planning platforms, dashboards, reporting environments, where they've tried to centralize data and create insights from it. Why do you think it still has not gone far enough, these solutions? And why does it need to go further?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most organizations, the issue isn't so much whether the signals are visible. The issues are really about whether the business can act on those signals quickly in a joined up and a collaborative, I guess, way. So, planning tools, dashboards, reporting, they all have value. They help teams see more and often see things earlier, but they don't automatically help the business to manage the knock-on effect across functions. So what we typically still see in practice is that you've got one team looking at service, another looking at inventory, another looking at supply, another team looking at production, another team looking at perhaps cost or margin, And so everyone can see part of the issue, but it's still really difficult to line up around what really matters most. So what the downstream impact is and what action should happen first. So, I mean, in retail, you may have a really clear view of availability or fulfillment pressure, but the commercial inventory and service implications are really still being managed in separate conversations. Same in manufacturing. You know, a material issue or a production problem, you know, might be visible really early, but it doesn't automatically help planning, you know, operations, and the teams respond in. So the gap isn't really just about visibility; it's turning that visibility into, you know, a faster, a clearer, and more cross-functional, as you said earlier. That means understanding where the issue actually sits, what it is going to affect next, you know, what trade-offs need to be made, and then how to move from sort of seeing and visualizing the problem to then coordinating and managing the response.
Totally. Thanks for that, Rich. So I guess it's about you know, prioritizing what needs action first and then acting on it within the ocean of insights that you may be getting from your data. And then Dante, I need to come to you on this actually. So with the organizations that are struggling turning visibility into action, you said that that data is coming in from disparate sources, and it's about bringing them together and then generating insights. And so within that struggle, what do you see from an architectural point of view underneath that struggle? What sort of architecture do businesses have these days that's stopping them from going far enough?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is, I guess if I could break it down into three things. The first one would then be the fragmentation in terms of the data stack, in terms of the source systems. I think I touched on that a little bit. Like if you have different systems that are not really integrated into one unified data platform, it becomes very difficult to even access the data, to even build any types of analytics on top of it. That's like the very first problem. The second is what I would say is there's this kind of a war between analytics, between AI, and between operational systems. So what was built for analytics was mainly built just for analytics. What AI implemented is usually standalone. If you have operational databases and systems, they usually operate on themselves as well. So there's this sort of silo and a war between these different types of systems that you have. And having to integrate them together is really, really difficult. So I think that's where a unified data platform usually comes into play as well. And the last is, I would say, governance. Because if you think about it that way, you have analytics, you have AI, you have operational systems. Each of these comes with its own governance in terms of the data, in terms of the infrastructure. And having to replicate that across different systems becomes very complex. And not to mention the different data copies that you need to have just to be able to operationalize and productionize these systems as well. So when it comes to customers that have issues, taking actions and making executions on top of the data, the main architecture issues usually boils down to either one or even more of these three problems that I see.
AI, analytics, and operations, and I guess the underlying governance is where the real challenge is. That's a huge topic across enterprises and the public sector today. So let's sort of segue into value chain command centers now. Rich, do you want to just give a brief on what the term really means for retailers and manufacturers?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kirti. I think practically, I'll describe a value chain command center, as a way of managing the business with a single connected view across the value chain. So what I've seen over the years is that, the issues that really matter the most rarely tend to sit just neatly in one function for very long. Something that starts in demand, can very quickly become an inventory issue, a fulfillment issue, margin issue, or an operational issue. So manufacturing something that's, beginning within supply, materials, or production can just as quickly show up within service, cost, and customer performance. So what the value chain command center is really doing is bringing commerce, product, supply chain, finance, and operations into one picture, so that the business can see where performance is moving, where building, where the wider impact is, and where decisions are needed. And I think that's what makes it useful. It gives people that are running the business a much clearer line of sight from issue, into impact, into action. And so in retail, that could be availability, fulfillment, margin. In manufacturing, it could be about material flow, production, quality, service, cost. And then when you've got that connected view, teams can collaboratively then make better trade-offs. They can respond earlier, and I think ultimately manage performance and efficiency much more effectively across that connected value chain.
Amazing. So sort of bringing all these aspects from different sides of the business together into a sort of a command center. But how is it different from a traditional control tower or a visibility layer?
Yeah. I think from my perspective, the main difference is that a traditional control tower, helps you see performance, whereas the value chain command center is about managing performance and efficiency across the value chain. So a visibility layer is really useful for showing, what's moving in a particular area of the business. It might show, service levels, inventory levels, transportation, production, or cost performance really well. But in practice, the leadership teams that we're speaking to still need to work out what that means for the rest of the business. So, what's the knock-on effect? What action needs to happen next? And I think what the value chain command center really does is connect those dots. So it's bringing those 5 value chain domains from commerce through to operations into a single picture, so that organizations can understand not just where that issue is showing up, but what it's affecting upstream and downstream. So the pressure in one part of the business can really quickly understand what is that wider impact? What does that ultimately mean for availability? What does it mean for fulfillment? What impact does it have for production, service, margin, and cost? And then of course, ultimately, what response does the business need to take? And I think that's where it becomes a lot more useful from a management point of view, because it's then, as we said before, it's about supporting those cross-functional decisions as opposed to just reporting. So a traditional control tower is how do I monitor a part of the operation? The command center is how do I manage that value chain as a single connected system.
Amazing. So I know that we're probably going to get a view of this single connected system very soon from you, Rich. But before that, I just want to go to Dante once about just understanding this single connected view a bit better. So as Rich talks about that execution layer, Dante, what does that imply from a platform point of view? How does that look, let's say, on the Databricks platform, this value chain command center? Just an overview from your side before we get into like a demo.
Yeah, sure. So I think the key idea that Richard has been driving is that all these different value chains, the pillars, they actually form a single unified view, a single unified platform. And that's the very first fundamental aspect, which is that you need to have a single governed foundation for both your data and your AI. That's the very first part of a platform that a platform needs to have. The second is that because it is an application, you do need to have something that is an operational layer that is able to respond in time and quickly to the different actions that you take, the different visualizations that you see, and then you need that operation layer to be able to react fast enough. So you need an operational database, a system. The next bit would then be to have an AI layer that is grounded based on the data that you already have. So it points back to my first point that if you have the foundation for your data and AI that is unified, you will have an AI layer that's grounded on the data that you already have. And I think the last bit would then be the application that you're trying to serve. If you have an application that can sort of deliver that experience within the same platform that follows the same access controls that you already have, it will actually be the perfect piece to complete the entire platform. Yeah.
Amazing. So like a foundation layer, which is governed, then an AI layer on top of it, and then applications and agents on top of that AI layer. That's like a neat stack that can help in creating these command centers. So with that, Rich, I believe you're going to show us a quick view of the command center. So if you can just set up some context, and then, oh, you've already shared your screen. So I hand over to you, Rich.
Super, thanks, Kirti. Let me start at the Command Center homepage, because I think at the top level, what I really want to see is a clean picture of how the business is performing, where pressure might be building, and where I need to look next. So this homepage, really gives me that overall line of sight. I can see 23 active alerts, 98.5% system health, 10 integrated data sources coming into the command center, and then 15 active ML models that are running across the environment. Straight away, I know that I'm looking at one connected picture, not just a set of disconnected reports. I can also see the business kind of organized in the way that most leadership teams actually need to manage it. So commerce, product, supply chain, finance, and operations. I can also, and that matters because, if performance is moving in one area, I need to really quickly understand what else it's likely to impact. We can also see natural AI here on the homepage. So we're not going to go into that in detail today, but natural AI is InspireXT's own platform for business process blueprinting and orchestration. And it's really relevant because it brings process context behind the numbers. So when something moves, I'm not just seeing the metric, but I've got a better view into where that sits within the process and where intervention is likely to be needed. So we can see 27 process models, 64 process maps that are already sitting behind the command center. And then at the bottom, we can see a number of AI agents that are already active across the data set. So demand forecasting, anomaly detection, customer sentiment, supplier risk, and inventory optimization, to name a few. But I'm going to walk this in the order that I would typically think about it from a management point of view, sort of starting with where the business is feeling the most impact commercially. So within the the commerce control tower, at the top level, I can see 12,458 customers. Customer satisfaction is sitting at 92%, order volume 5,234, and customer lifetime value sits at just over $45,000. I've also got the satisfaction trend, recent order volume pattern, customer mix across enterprise, mid-market, and SMB. But what I'm looking for here isn't just whether a KPI is up or down. I really want to know whether something is starting to move, whether that be in customer experience, in order fulfillment, or revenue, quality that could point to one issue somewhere else in the value chain. And so I've got some early forward-looking signals as well. So I've got some predictive intelligence models here. The churn model is identifying 3 high-risk accounts in the next 30 days. The customer lifetime value model is projecting a 12% increase in Q3. The next best action model has generated 246 personalized recommendations. This is already really helping me to see where I might need to focus attention before the number turns up in a month-end review. If I want to understand that commercial picture in a bit more depth, I can drill down into any of these detailed reports. So let's take a look at the customer satisfaction report to begin with. So now I'm into the customer detail, and this is where it gets a lot more useful from a management point of view. So I can see that on-time delivery is at 94.8%, on-time shipment at 96.2%, revenue loss at 234K, total revenue at 12.4 billion, and I've got a CSI index of 8.7 out of 10. So I'm not just looking at satisfaction in isolation. I can also start to see how service performance and revenue loss are moving alongside it. And what I'd want to understand at this point is, what's really sitting behind those numbers, and that's where some of this detailed analysis really helps. I can see, revenue by channel, return trends, shipping cost analysis, and also revenue potential versus realization by product category. So now I'm starting to understand, whether the issue is in demand, in service, in cost to serve, returns, or perhaps some combination of all of those. And then the AI insights make that even more practical. So in this case, we're flagging strong B2B revenue growth at 15% month on month. A return rate spike in April that's driven by electronics defects, an 18k per month shipping cost optimization opportunity because DHL is materially more expensive than some of my local carriers for similar delivery times. And then right at the bottom, we can see AI anomaly detection surfacing issues that need management attention. Revenue loss from cancellations that are running 30% above expected in the government sector, or DHL shipping costs, as we touched on before, which are 18% above the forecast. And I think this is really the kind of detail that helps us start to move from that kind of broad commercial concern into a much clearer management response. So at this point, I've kind of got a better read on where the customer and performance is moving. If I go back to the homepage, the next question I'd really like to ask is that being driven by my product mix, by my stock position, perhaps by portfolio performance? And so next I'll drill into the product control tower. Here I can see just over 8,000 SKUs, inventory turnover at about 6.8 times, stock out rate at 2.3%, and product margin at 34.5%, up 1.2% from last quarter. So I can also see how my categories are performing and how inventory is trending over time. I guess what I'm really trying to understand here is whether the pressure that I saw on the commerce side is very much concentrated in certain categories, whether we have perhaps a stock position issue, whether margin is being affected by mix, or whether life cycle is becoming part of that story as well. And the models that we've got here really help us to start answering that. So I can see that we've got a 15% demand increase expected for my electronics category, 142 recommended price adjustments, 28 products that are starting to enter the decline phase, and then $2.3 million in potential savings identified from an inventory optimization perspective. So now I'm beginning to see, which parts of the portfolio need attention, and also what are the likely consequences if we don't respond. And then once I know where that kind of product pressure is, the next question is, can the supply chain support the response, or is the supply chain going to ultimately become the next constraint? So drilling into the supply chain control, here I can see 96.2% delivery. Average lead time is at 4.9 days. Just 12,000 active shipments, and I also see my inventory turnover number here again as well. I've also got some delivery performance, supply performance trends, and what really matters is not just whether supply chain performance looks healthy overall, but whether there are some perhaps risks that are building underneath that will affect service, inventory, or perhaps cost next. So the predictive models are really useful for understanding that. I can see an 18% demand spike predicted for the West Coast region. I can see 45k of fuel savings from route optimization, medium risk that's identified for two of my supplier relationships, and once again a $2.3 million potential saving in inventory optimization as well. So I'm already starting to move from monitoring and prioritizing some of the actions that I can take. If I want to go further into supplier risk and whether the network is likely to hold up to some of these pressures, this is where I might drill into my supplier performance report. So this is, I think, a really good example of where the command center becomes a lot more useful than just a high-level visibility layer. So now I can see the supplier detail behind that overall supply picture. I see my delivery KPI, my acknowledgement rate at 96.8%, my rejection density at 1.8%. I can look at average days to acknowledge POs over time and by supplier. I can compare delivery and acknowledgement performance by supplier and warehouse. And then I've also got a supplier scorecard at the bottom, which is exactly the kind of thing that operators kind of typically need to see. So supplier A is performing strongly, supplier B is good, supplier C is fair, and supplier D definitely needs some improvement, with the weakest delivery KPI, the lowest acknowledgement rate, and the highest rejection percentage. So this gives me a much clearer view in where the supply exposure really sits from a supplier perspective. And then we've got some AI insights once again that tell me, what really needs management attention. So we've got an overstock alert in electronics that's carrying, $45,000 a month in extra cost. A supplier risk flagged where tech parts delivery performance is degraded to 75% on time. And then a 3.2% cost of goods sold improvement that's already achieved through procurement optimization. And then the anomaly layer below makes some of those immediate priorities really clear as well. So supplier on-time delivery is running at 78% against an expected 95%. And we can see that that's very much driven by raw material shortages and logistics bottlenecks in Asia Pacific. We can see that warehouse capacity utilization is running at 94% against an expected 80%. And that often points to, time storage at low risk. So then from an operator's point of view, this is kind of where I move from a general sense that the supply chain is under pressure into a much, more precise view of which suppliers, which warehouses, what impact and what response is really needed. And I think this is also where an AI agent becomes especially useful. So rather than asking analysts to pull that entire supply story together manually, a user can go in and query, which suppliers are creating the biggest service risk, which suppliers, or where is my inventory buildup, where is my cost exposure, and get that answer against the same connected data set that's powering all of the value chain command center views. So once I know where the supply side, exposure sits, the next thing I really want to understand is, what's the value at risk. So let's come out of our agent and drop into our finance and control tower. So finance really matters here because not every issue, deserves the same level of management attention. We really want to know creating, real revenue, margin, cash, or cost consequence. So on this page, I can see, total revenue is 8.3 million. I can see gross profit margin, operating cash flow, EBITDA at $4.2 million. I can also see my revenue and profit trends, operating cash flow. And what I like here is that I'm not waiting until month end to tell me what's happened. It's already bringing out what's likely to matter next. So, for example, the EBITDA forecast projection is projected 21% against 18.2% currently. The AI-powered insights are identifying areas for procurement-led cost of goods sold reduction, operating leverage revenue from revenue growth, labour savings through automation. And so this is where the command center is, helping the business to make better trade-offs by not only asking what's happening operationally, but also answering, what issues matter most from value point of view. So finally, and bridging into operations, this is where it all typically lands in the real world. So here I can see from a overall equipment effectiveness percentage from my manufacturing operations, 88% OEE, 99.2% production efficiency, 85.3% resource utilization, and a sort of a rising trend on my quality score as well. I can also see some efficiency trends, how utilization is split across labour, equipment, warehouse and transport. But what I'm really looking for at this point is where can the business actually intervene to improve some of these outcomes? So if supply is under pressure, if product demand is shifting, or if service performance is moving, where does that really need to change operationally? And once again, our predictive intelligence models really help answer that directly. So I can see that 3 equipment items here have been flagged for maintenance. We've got a potential 15% efficiency gain possible through production optimization, 23% reduction in defect rates, and an 8% output increase opportunity through better resource allocation. And so this is where I can start to connect that wider value chain picture back to execution. It gives me that clearer line of sight into where things like throughput, quality, capacity, or reliability really need attention if I want to improve, service, cost, or margin outcomes. So I guess the key point, and coming back to the homepage, the key point in the demo is that each of these towers in its own right, but the real value from the command center comes from connecting those. So I can start with where the business is feeling pressure commercially. I can understand what's driving it at the product level. I can test whether the supply chain can support the response. I can see the financial consequence, and then I can also land that back to operational action. And that's what makes it really useful from a management point of view. As we said before, moving from that kind of issue to impact to action view. And of course, as Dante said earlier on, the reason that all of this works is that it's sitting on a Databricks foundation, underneath it. So that's what gives us that governed data layer across commerce, across product, and the rest of our value chain domains. It's what powers the predictive models and the AI-driven insights. And Databricks is also what powers the agents and that application experience as well. So, it's not just a set of dashboards that we end up looking at here. It's, as we touched on previously, it's this connected business management layer that's ultimately built by InspireXT. It's powered by Databricks, and it's really about helping retailers and manufacturers to run their value chains with better visibility, better context, and ultimately better decision making.
Thanks, Rich. I mean, this is amazing. You've got like the story of the business on the command center, and then this is so important for the current times when a CXO or a CFO or a chief operating officer needs to see what's happening within the business for resilience on a day-to-day basis and in real time. So I'm going to come to Dante with this demo. That just a follow-up question: what are the specific capabilities of Databricks that come into play here, Dante? If you could give an overview of that.
Yeah, sure. So I think the very first foundation is that in order for all the data sources to come in, you definitely need a unified data platform that can, essentially ingest the data from these different source systems, govern them under one unified view. So I think having that lakehouse, the combination of a lakehouse architecture, together with Unity Catalog, which is our unified governance layer, like having this actually enables the integration of these different data sources into one platform. So the next part is then looking at the ML and AI stuff that was on there, looking at the predictive intelligence models, the AI agents that were built. All these were powered by Databricks. And Databricks actually allows you, using our Mosaic AI framework, to deploy, to develop, to manage all your different agents and models on top of the platform itself. Then again, governed with the same Unity Catalog governance model. So it just follows that same governance layer to manage everything, all your assets within the platform. And then last but not least, you have like the operational state layer, which is basically lake-based. You have an operational database that is able to serve transactional data back to the application so that you can make actions quickly based on that. So it's not just an analytical backbone, but you also have a transactional one that can make quick writes, quick reads to the application.
Yeah, so I'm going to unpick that a bit more. So you mentioned lake-based having this being the operational database than just an analytics layer. Why do apps and agents need an operational database than just an analytics layer? If you could unpick that a bit further.
Yeah, sure. So if you're looking at analytical workloads, using it for transactional reads and writes usually is not very performant. You're going to take a long time to be able to read or write from these data warehouses, for example. So in these situations, you require a transactional database that could provide low latency to the agents so that it can take quicker actions, retain the state memory so that it retains things like your conversation history, the context of the conversations, what it needs to do based on the recommendations and the information that it gets from the user. So these are the things that requires a transactional database. Lake-based is our managed Postgres offering, which is native to the Lakehouse. So what it really means is, remember the point that I brought up just now, that if you have a data warehouse and you have an operational database, this usually sits in different platforms or different systems And having to synchronize the data between them can be quite complex and problematic, because then it becomes a problem of like complex data structures, maintaining different data copies and stuff like this. But having lake-based, you can essentially sync the data between the lakehouse and the operational database without having to worry about managing different data copies. That's like one of the biggest value that lake-based provides. And having that in your production environment, in your applications, can really make the AI agents that you have much more performant, much more accurate, and the data that comes in and goes out then gets synchronized across the unified data platform. So you don't have to worry about having disparate or fragmented data stacks across your data estate.
Amazing. So it just makes the whole experience a lot more real time for the business. Thanks, Dante. So hearing Dante, and Richard, I'm going to come to you. Hearing Dante describe the platform foundation, which of those capabilities do you think matter most when you're delivering value chain command center for a business, and how does it work in practice?
Yeah, absolutely, and great explanation there from Dante. I think for me, the ones that matter most in practice are the governed data foundation through Unity Catalog that Dante mentioned, the app layer through Databricks apps, which provides that kind of operational user experience that we saw in the demo, and then the operational state behind it all with Lakebase. So the governed data foundation really matters, because if people are going to run their business off of command center views and data, they need confidence in those numbers. So as soon as you're bringing in commerce, product, supply chain, and finance and operations into one picture, that trust really becomes critical. So if teams don't believe that they're looking at a consistent view of service or inventory, cost, margin, or operational performance, then the command center quickly becomes just another reporting layer rather than a trusted management tool. I think the application layer really matters as well, because adoption matters. This only works if people can use it within the flow of day-to-day management and execution. So it's got to be practical for the people running, service, supply, inventory, production. It's not just something that looks good in a leadership presentation or board presentation. And then that operational state that both you and Dante were talking about is also really important, because execution ultimately isn't stateless. If the business is working through an issue, making trade-offs, tracking actions, escalating decisions, then the context around all of that really needs to persist. Otherwise, you're just looking at the latest numbers without any real continuity around the investigation and the response. And then I think the AI capabilities provided by Databricks ML models through Genie, through AgentBricks, are obviously a massive part of the value as well, particularly around prediction and prioritization, which we saw a lot of in the demo, but also that business user friendly investigation through natural language, just being able to ask questions and have conversations with your data. But I think for me, the reason the whole thing becomes really workable in practice is really when those capabilities are sitting on top of trusted data inside a business facing experience and with enough operational context behind it for real decisions and follow through. And I think that's when it becomes a useful, genuinely useful way to run performance and efficiency across the value chain.
Okay, great. So we've covered so much ground today. We've sort of looked at trends in the boardrooms, right? And then how, and even tech trends, like from a Databricks lens. And then we've gone into what value chain command center is, how do we turn visibility into execution. Then we've actually been into a demo, and then we say what's the architecture and what are the capabilities from a world-class platform like Databricks that's supporting that value chain command center. So I want to bring this discussion to a close, and then I guess I'm going to ask some very simple questions from the speakers. That questions about what are the next steps for a business that is thinking about adopting or getting or embarking on this journey, right? So we'll start with you, Rich. So if an organization is very early in their journey of adopting a value chain command center, where should they start?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from experience, my advice would be, start small, but start in a place that really matters. So what I wouldn't try to do is design that whole command center estate up front. The better starting point is to pick one or two areas where the business is already feeling, pain, but where that impact crosses functions and where, a better line of sight across those functions would lead to better decisions. So that could be, a combination of service and inventory, a supply and a production issue, or a margin and fulfillment issue. The important thing is that it sits across the value chain, not just neatly inside of one function, because I think that's where the command center really starts to prove its value. And then from there, I'd focus on three things. First, get a clear view of the business question that you're trying to answer. Second, make sure that you've got the right data all together. And then third, define how the business will actually use it. So who's going to look at it? What decisions will it support? And what actions ultimately should follow? And I think if organizations can get those three things right, they can start building something that's genuinely useful rather than just interesting. And then, of course, once the business sees the value in one or two priority use cases, becomes much easier to then start scaling that out across commerce, across product, supply chain, finance, and operations in a much more structured way.
Amazing. And Dante, with Richard's comments on starting small, maybe from a certain part of the business where you see spillovers happening for using a command center, for starting to use a command center. Let's say a business does that. So from a Databricks point of view, how does the business scale? What gives them the confidence to scale on the Databricks platform?
Okay, yeah. So I think for our platform, we provide a bunch of features that cater to customers with different stages of data maturity. So be it whether you're very early stage, you're pretty advanced, like we have features that fit your use cases, meaning that we have things like agent bricks, which allow you to develop agents that are completely managed. You don't need to know how to code it out. It's kind of like a no-code way of doing agent development and deployment. But of course, like, if you're starting off with a data layer, a data foundation, getting started with this value chain, the very first step is to really establish the data foundations. I think I completely agree with what Richard said. Like, you start small and then you expand from there. But the first step to get things right is really building the data foundation, because everything else like extends from that. And this is something that I've always talked about with customers. Like when they come to me and they tell me about all their struggles with data platform, the very first thing I always align with them is like, hey, you need to get your data platform foundations right. Like, what is your architecture right now? Let's discuss that first. And then think about what's the very first use case you want to get started once you get these foundations right. Yeah. And I think in Databricks, we really offer a lot of these kind of features. Even now, even if you don't have the technical know-hows of how to build these foundations, like we have a bunch of AI embedded engines within the platform that can help you to automate many of these manual tasks. So even things like populating tables and columns with descriptions, coding out different data workflows, like we can help with that. So this is just some of the capabilities of the platform.
Yeah, totally agree, Dante. I mean, data is that infrastructure and the foundation that literally all of the intelligence sits on, right? So I couldn't agree with you more. But we sort of come to the end of our discussion today, and I thank you, Dante, for giving your valuable insights from a Databricks lens, and Richard for giving your valuable insights from a practice lens of having interacted with businesses. So I think it's been an amazing discussion. I hope all the practitioners or people who are exploring Databricks or this topic who've joined this LinkedIn Live, I hope you have gained relevant insights today. We will be doing more of these, so watch this space. And until the next time, thank you, and I hope to see you all again. And hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kirti.
Thank you. Thanks.